Hi everybody, this is Rob Redman of Prior Studios and welcome to this video. There's been a lot of talk recently about the work that Gmunk has done for Tron and the videos that he's posted up on his website, which you've probably seen, but if not, then there's a video of the Tron opening sequence and then a few screen grabs and a few bits and pieces about how it's done. There's some nice screen grabs here of just elements of the video. Since this came out a couple of weeks ago, lots of people have been emailing me asking how you might kind of approach this kind of a project. So I thought we'd have a look at it, and it's not something I've done a huge amount of that kind of work, or not with that kind of a look anyway. So we're going to dive in and just kind of have a look at how we might do it. I think we'll go in the top view first of all, and I'm just going to take a linear spline, and the first way we'll do this is possibly using a sweep NURBS. So I'm just going to turn on snapping as well, so we get that kind of nice grid going on. So turn on 2.5D snapping and use a linear spline, and I'm just going to start plotting out a few points. Now they don't have to be in any particular order. I'm just going to kind of randomly generate something here. I'm just going to make sure this all snaps to the grid though, so it keeps quite kind of regular. I think that's probably something that would look quite nice. So I'm just going to randomly draw in. I'm just going to pull back out here as well, give myself a bit more room. Although I need my grid, so let's just pop in here, add a few of these. I'm not going for any particular kind of a look with this. I'm just kind of plotting out some random ones that might be interesting shapes. I'm going to bring that one a bit further across. I'm also just going to show you a couple of the fun spline tools that are available to you as well in Cinema 4D that people tend to kind of ignore a little bit, I think, but well worth having a look at. Okay, so now in the in Gmunk's videos you have kind of multiple paths going along, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can either start plotting out, you know, a variety of different lines. So we could go in here and let's just say we could add another spline. Let's do the same again. Let's take this one and do something which kind of lies across a similar path, but perhaps not quite the same. So we'll do one which follows a similar route across our screen, but doesn't necessarily follow the exact same path. So where this one pops up here, I'm going to take this second one, and I'm going to just do something slightly different with it. So that one can come down here. So this is probably not the most riveting part of the video for you to look at, just me plotting lines, but the fun will start in a minute. So let's just take this one here, drag that over. I'm trying to kind of stick to the larger of the two grids on show here. So each grid is divided into 9 squares, so 3 by 3 here. I don't know if you can see it on the video, and I can't zoom in because the grid will change as I zoom in, but that's what I'm doing. I'm sticking to these bigger squares like so, and I'm just kind of plotting this out. I'll do a couple more. In fact, we'll go up to there and then to the end. Okay, so we've got 2 splines now. I've just hit H to zoom out to the extents of our scene elements, and so we've got that second spline there and that first spline that we drew there. And I think probably what we need to do is just make a material. So we'll just call this one material 1, and let's give this a kind of a bluey colour, quite a bright bluey colour, maybe with a tiny hint of green to it. And I'm just going to go to illumination and change the mode from blend to Fong. I prefer Fong, it's got a slight kind of more shiny finish to it. Right, so I'm going to take this colour and so 208, 255, and I'm going to pop that into the luminance. So let's just put that in there like so. That was right, wasn't it? 208. 208. Okay. Specular we can turn off, we don't really need it. but you can turn it on if you want, and this actually might look quite nice with a tiny bit of reflection, maybe even a kind of Fresnel shader just to get some darkened edges, or the opposite way around. Might be nicer to have a slightly darker inside or kind of facing points, and then the kind of glancing angle polys at a brighter angle might look quite good as well. You could also add maybe a touch of glow, although 500% is going to be way too strong for that. Let's turn that down to about 150, and a radius of 10, that's probably fine as well. Okay, so we've got that one there. I'm just going to duplicate that, and we'll call this one 2. No fancy names or anything, and let's increase the green, maybe drag down the blue a little, so we've just got a slightly different colour. It's very similar, in fact we might make that just a bit similar again. In fact, let's darken it somewhat and make it a bit greener. Okay, so 14, 177 and 147. 14, 147 and 177, is that what I said? Other way around, 177, 147. 177, 147, like so. Okay, so this is a little bit greener again, and the glow is set to take its colour from the material here, so I don't need to worry about that too much. And we've got 2 materials there. Okay, so let's grab ourselves a circle spline. That's way too big. Let's make this 2, and I think we'll duplicate that as well. So we've got 1 circle, 1 spline, 1 circle, 1 spline, and we'll add a sweep NURBS, and I'll just duplicate that as well. I think grab the first circle and the first spline and drag them into one of the sweep NURBS, and the same with the other one. Now if we go into our perspective view here and just find a corner to make sure that everything's on the right axis, which it might not be, and I don't think it is, so let's take the circle spline and just flip that over to XY and do the same for the other one, and that should now be fine. And we can take one material, plop it on one sweep NURBS and one on the other. I'm just going to zoom back out again here, so you can see we've got these 2 splines, and at the moment if I render this we're just going to have a kind of a bit of a mess going on. What would be quite nice would be to maybe have a slightly reflective black floor added to the scene, just so you get a bit more of that kind of the reflection and the edges of this glow would just kind of spread out very slightly, or you could do that in post, but really we're looking at just how you might animate this sort of thing, and it's just a very simple case of the end growth here. So we could drop that down to 0, take the other one, drop that down to 0, and then just add a keyframe. So add a keyframe for the first one and go to, say, let's say frame 60. This always tends to be kind of faster than it really should, so I'm going to up that to 100. Apologies for my dog barking in the background there, by the way. Okay, so what have I just done? I've just added the animation for this first one. I'm going to go back to the other one and add a keyframe, just control clicking on the end growth there. Oh, I've done that in the wrong place. I'm just going to grab that and slide that to the back, right to frame 0, and then at frame 75 I'm going to guess I'm going to increase this to 100%. I'm just making these different just for a little bit of kind of mixing up a little bit, really, more than anything. What I might do, no, I'll just do that like this. This is fine. Okay, so when you play this might actually appear a bit too fast. Maybe only a touch. Okay, so I'm going to spread this out to 90, and I'll take that one to about 75, just to slow this down a bit. As I was watching the video that Gmunk had put on his website, I noticed that actually the motion is quite slow, and it's just because there's lots going on. It starts off very simple, but more and more motion is added in there as it goes along, and I think just slowing it down really helps. So you've got these 2 splines like this. They actually look quite cool, quite like that, and you can imagine building this into, you know, all kinds of things. And obviously what you could do is you could take maybe an area around here. Let's just use this as an example. Let's take this area. We could make a building out this this section here, or just put some uprights, because there's actually quite a lot of 3D data going on in there as well. So I'm going to take my linear spline and I'm going to add a point on the grid there, and that's just at this corner here, and then I'm going to add one directly above it on the grid there, and then if we just kind of shuffle along, I can add one there as well, one back there, and we'll line this one up with the other side of that section. So all I'm really doing here is just kind of trying to line them up with the view. So if I go back into this side, I can see that because I've got snapping turned on, I know that if I click here it's going to join up in the right place, and we should find that that is now right, and it is. Okay, so what we really want to do is possibly have another one for going from this point to this point, and the same again there, just so it turns more into a cube. So I'm going to drop my selection there. I'm going to go back into my linear spline and I'm going to add a point there, and just make sure I'm putting it in the right place. So I'm going to add one there. Okay, I'm going to do the same again, and I'm going to put it just there, which is the other side. It's over here, and I just need to connect it up at the top, which will be there. Okay, so I've now got two extra splines. I'm just going to open up one of my sweep NURBS, and I'm going to grab a circle from it. I don't think I need that spline 3 either. Okay, so we've now got, let's just turn that off, see where it came from. I think I just duplicated that, so I'm going to kill that off. Okay, so I've got this circle and I've got these 3 splines I want to do, so I'll just duplicate the circle again. I'll add another sweep NURBS. These are going to have to go back onto the XZ axis, I think, if I'm right there. I need to duplicate that sweep NURBS object, and I'm going to take my circles and just drop them between the splines, the path splines, because I know that I'm going to be using them in a minute as a pair, just to create these extra splines here. Now it does look like I may need to change the axis of these circle splines again, so I'm just going to control click and select them all like so, and I'll just need to make sure they're right. Oh, so they should have been in the X or Y. Okay, apologies, it's my fault. Now these all are on this pale kind of more turquoisey material, which I believe is the first one. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to drag that onto all of those, just so they match up with this line. And then what we need to do is just find out at what keyframe these start to grow. So I'm just going to rename these as well. So I'm going to call this up 1, hit the down key, up 2, down key, and then we'll just call this one the frame, because that's more of a frame. And I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to reduce the end growth right down to 0, and then go back to the beginning of my animation here. Actually I'll leave that on 1% or just a few percent here, just so I can see them for now. And what I'm going to do is just scroll through my animation until the spline grows to that point, which is going to be about there. So this is my frame, and I know that I can back this off to 0 now, and I can add a keyframe. I can move forward just a bit more, and at this point I want the up 1 to start, so I'll add a keyframe for that, and then I can knock them forward another 2 frames and go to up 2, add a keyframe, and then at that frame I really want the frame to have grown all the way around. I think that would probably look best, so that will get to there. So when they join up again, so the frame will go up and over the top, then back down again, and the floor part will go across and round, and then they'll meet up and we'll have that fully grown. So 100%, add another keyframe. If I just back off, you'll see what that's doing. So that will go up, around, then they'll meet just there, but I do need to go back to this keyframe because that one's grown, so I need to decide how long it's going to take for that to grow up, and I reckon I'm going to say about frame 50, and we'll raise that one up, add a keyframe, and then I'll just take the other one and I'll back this one off just a little bit, lift it up, add a keyframe, and we should now see, as I drag through this, I'll just drop my selection so you can see it more clearly. See the two lines disappearing, that grows all together, and then the scene does the rest of its thing. Now I don't want to go into making you watch me kind of building loads of splines and loads of these cages and things like this, but this is quite a nice way of doing it. Now you could draw all your paths in Illustrator and then just use the you could use the structure manager to find out where these points are just by selecting a point on your spline. So if, for example, I was to choose this point here, you go into your structure and you could cut and paste from this panel here and just put this in. When you start a new spline, you could click your first point and then just input that information into there, so you know it's in exactly the same location, or you turn snapping on. Either way works, and it's kind of down to the way you prefer working. So what happens in the actual video is it's kind of like it's looking down over a street, and that's the whole idea of the piece. So I'm just going to lift my camera or my viewpoint up to about here, and what you would do is just scroll along, grab myself a camera, I'll look through it, and what I'm going to do is actually I might zoom in just a touch because the camera motion does follow the motion of the growth of the splines. So what I'm going to do is in my top view, right at the beginning, I'm going to have my camera kind of over here, only part way along. Now I've got snapping turned on, which I don't really want for this camera move. So I'm just going to move it along. I'm just going to line it up just a touch, just to about there. And with the camera selected, I'm just going to add a position keyframe, but I'll do this right at the start, so frame 0, and then I'll go right to the end of that move, which is, let's say, frame 50. Actually, no, it's not. It's way past that. What am I talking about? It's right at the end of the animation. Apologies, that's me not paying attention. Okay, so we'll move the camera to about there, and just imagine that this has all still got stuff growing up out of it as well in the y-axis, just like we had at the start. So now if I go back to the beginning, we should have a nice camera move, although I'm just going to open up my timeline, and I'm going to grab my camera, and I'm going to go to key and linear, because I want that to be a constant velocity move. By default that will be an ease in and ease out move, which I don't really want for this. So we should see the line start to grow across the frame. Now what we are seeing is that it's missing that building growing up. So maybe we should have the camera starting to move just a little bit later. Maybe that would be better. So that should now grow up, and we'll see that, and this will start going across, and add as much detail as you want. Let's just have a quick look at how that looks. I've got GI turned on, which probably don't really need for this particular example, but you can see that's coming across quite nicely. I think they're probably a bit thick as well. I'd go for them slightly thinner. But with the uprights, once they're all grown and you see this actually in motion, this will look really nice. Horrible framing here, so you might want to play around with your camera position a little bit. That really doesn't look all that pretty. You probably want to move the camera back a bit, maybe even out a touch, just to get a bit more perspective in there, or use a wider lens on your camera setting. Might be a good idea as well. Okay, so that's one way of doing something like this, but there's another way you can do similar things, or combine the two. So let's just start a new scene, Actually, I will go back and I'll just pinch one of those materials for now and just paste that in there, just so I don't have to do it again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cube and I'm going to make it editable by hitting the C key, and I'm just going to lift it up. That should be by 100. Yeah, okay, so that's sitting on our ground plane. I'm going to take the axis point and I'm just going to put this down to 0, just so that that's right at the bottom of the object. And what I'm going to do is turn on, I'll probably turn off rotation, and I'll keep position on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my MoGraph palette and I'm going to add a tracer object. I'm going to drop that, that cube was already selected, so that's already in there, which is good. I don't need a sky object for this. Now what I want to do is, let's just hide that again. I want to take this cube and the points of it are going to be traced as I animate it. So what I'll do is start at frame 0 and I'll take my object and I will just knock that back, let's say -500. So it's there, add a keyframe, and then I'll put it to, I'll give it 2 seconds to move across, and I'll just put that to 500. Add another keyframe, and you'll see now if I go to the beginning and play through, we should see some black lines appearing as the tracer traces the points of this cube. Now the reason you might want to do this method instead is because at this point what you could do is have it static on the X and Z axis, but you could spend maybe another second or so or less raising that up, and let's just say to there, just for the sake of this video, add a keyframe, and you can see we've got looped path there for our animation. So I'm going to just open my timeline again, add the cube, and go back to key linear, because I want this to be completely linear. Go back to the beginning. In fact, I'll hide the cube now, and what I will do is I'll add a circle spline. Again, that's way too big. Let's just turn that down to 2, and I'm going to take my tracer and my circle spline and I'm going to put them into a sweep NURBS, and we should find that we grow some splines now which go across and then up. Now if I drop that material onto there, you can see a bit better what's going on. Okay, so that grows along and up. So this is quite a good method of creating a kind of a nice framework, and there's no reason why you couldn't do something like for example, let's take our cube at that topmost point there, move forward 1 frame, actually let's move back a frame, add a rotation keyframe, move forward 1 frame, and then just rotate it by 90 degrees and keyframe that. Let's just open up the timeline and make sure that they're all linear. So go to key linear, and then we should see that we get a kind of a nice rotation at the top there, and the points should join up again like so. Now the reason I did it over 1 frame is because actually if you look at the top of a cube like this, if these points were to actually spend some time rotating, they'd come away from that kind of nice square regular grid, and you'd get a bit of a loop going on which wouldn't look all that pretty. But I think this works quite well. So I'll just play through that again so you can see it happen. Now I think that looks great. And there's other tricks you can do with the tracer object, because the tracer will trace the points no matter what you're doing with them. So at this point, let's just take the cube so we can see where the keyframes are. We could take the polygons and we could, let's say, see, I've got point level animation recording here, which means that the software is remembering where all the points are as well as just the objects. So what I could do is I could hit extrude. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we'll give it a go, and I'm going to put that to 200, and I'll drop my selection, add a keyframe, and I'm hoping that this will grow out as well. I don't know if it will, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but we'll soon see. So it did, but it's taken them from the origin of the last place it knew, so not quite what we want, but there's a way around that. We can undo everything we did there. Let's go back to the beginning, just make sure I undid everything I needed to do. Okay, so I've just undone that extrusion. I'm going to go back now, and so what we can do is get to that point again, and if it was just to have like a bridge or an overhang, we could just take the cube again, and from this point on we could go forward another second again and just kind of, oops, I want to be in object mode. I could just bring that across, add another keyframe, and once again I'll need to make sure that they're all linear, although I think that might well be, that has. Okay, so I've got a keyframe, back to the beginning, I'll hide the cube again and see what we've got. Okay, right, so that's looking quite nice. Now, what if we did want to do something like that extrusion? How would we make it work? Well, what we could do is, if I select my cube, I'm just going to delete this keyframe by opening my timeline. I can't quite select it there, just delete that. Okay, so let's just go back to the beginning, scrub through so that all disappears. Right, what we could have is, if right at the very beginning, actually when you do this, it might be worth doing this as you construct it. I'm going to flip around here and I'm going to go over to this face and I'm going to hit D for an extrusion, and I've got a 0 offset. So I've got that extrusion there, which is fine, that's what I want. Now I can take this back. Now you can see it might have added a point that we don't want. It's in fact taken it to the origin, and that's because we've keyframed. But what you could do is do a 0 level extrusion. Let me show you what I mean. Start a new scene, and I'm just going to add a cube, make it editable. If I press D for extrude, you can see I can drag in the viewport, but I can type it over here in the offset field in the attributes manager. I can type 0, hit return, and that's done an extrusion even though there's no depth to the extrude. So all the points are there. We've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We've got 12 points there because we've got this extra. And if I pull this, it's not going to make the cube object as though it was a primitive any wider, but it's going to take this extra face that we've made, which is lying directly on top of the one behind it, so we can control that extrusion that way. And if we did this with the tracer object, we wouldn't get that weird kind of triangular motion because these points exist right from the very beginning. So that's what I would suggest doing. So let's go back to this scene. So we've got this version that we can do, which is reasonably simple to operate and gives you some really good timing controls. And then we've got this version here, which, although I've kind of made a bit of a pig's ear of, does work very well. The tracer object's really powerful, and you can use any object for this. It doesn't just have to be a cube. You can, anything that's got points, so any 3D object at all, you can dump in there and that will work really nicely. Okay, I hope this has been of some help, and I hope that all of you that have emailed me about this question find that at least a little bit useful. Keep sending your questions. I'm starting to enjoy recording these simple question and answer sessions, and I'll speak to you all again soon.